and head that direction. Yep. Hebrews chapter 12. So this is a very cryptic question, but to whom was the book of Hebrews written? Back to school sales. I don't think that's who the author of Hebrews was writing to. Do we have to
Hebrews?
What was that, Shelley?
Let's just guess. Hebrews?
The Hebrews! Yeah, who are the Hebrews?
Coffee drinkers.
Male coffee drinkers, yes. Or they were making beer, who knows? Right? It doesn't say what they were brewing, just they were brewing.
Kombucha.
Yeah, kombucha? No, that ferments, that doesn't brew. Anyway.
Weren't the Hebrews the saved Jews?
Well, no, actually, so they weren't just the saved ones, they were just Jews. Yeah, the whole nation, the whole Jewish nation is the Hebrews. The Hebrew nation is the other way that they're referred to as. But specifically, the book of Hebrews was written to believing Jews who were being tempted to kind of turn away from Christ, to go back to the law, and to try to attain relationship, communion with God, and salvation by once again going back to sacrifices and following those religious holidays and rituals that had gotten them through the first, 2,400 years without a Messiah. So the author of Hebrews, which we don't know who the author is, there's no attributions. He was an anonymous, or maybe even she was an anonymous author. So we don't really know who it was written by, but we know who it was written to, because it's kind of in the title there. To the tribe of Israel who has come to know Christ. And so a lot of the book of Hebrews is written from that perspective of, don't go back to the old covenant, because we now have a better covenant, one that has superseded all of these things. And that everything that you do, if you're trying to go back to the law to find salvation and reconciliation with God, then basically you've said that the work of Christ on the cross was not enough. And so the author goes through many times talking about how the work of Christ was sufficient. And we don't need to crucify him all over again, because he did it once and it was enough. And that's kind of what we're going to talk a little bit about here in Hebrews chapter 12. There's a statement, one particular statement in here that tells us that what he did was enough. And so, if you look at Hebrews chapter 12, how many of you have the Bible you read out of has a title on top of this section of the Bible? What does it say?
Jesus the example.
Ooh, Jesus the example. What else?
Founder and perfecter of our faith.
Nope, that's what it says. That's the title.
Jesus, founder and perfecter of our
That's
faith.
the title of the section.
What section are you talking about?
Chapter 12, Hebrews chapter 12. Wow. Now remember, just so you guys, just remember, just because it's there doesn't mean it was in the original text that it was written. This is titles that have been added by the publishers of the particular Bible that you're reading out of. So like mine, I'm reading out of the New King James Version, and it just says the race of faith. Right? What's that?
No, I don't have one between.
The
I have
4
one
verse
between
1?
14. I have one between 13 and 14.
Oh wow! I tell you what, there's no uniformity here.
His says run the race.
Run the race, yeah, the race of faith, right? And it's interesting because these titles that are put in are put in to kind of help you understand what's coming, right? But yet there's confusion here. One says, mine says the race of faith, run the race, Jesus the author and perfecter of our faith. So
is yours saying the race people of faith?
No, race.
Oh,
like
race.
the striving towards
Okay,
the competition of faith, right? Although that's probably about the only race I would agree with, right? There is no color in Christ, but what's that?
The human race.
The human race, yeah.
That's right, the human race.
We are the human race of faith. So we're going to read through verse. We'll read 1 first and kind of go through it a little bit and talk about it. And then verse 2. And normally I don't just limit it to 2 verses, but there's a lot to unpack here, especially when we look into the original Greek and to see how it was translated and some other possible meanings behind some of these Greek words that the author used. Because when we read it just as it's written in our Bible, the English translation we have, it's very easy to kind of make an assumption about what those words mean. So, as you're reading through scriptures in your own time, I always encourage you to go back to the original Greek and use a Greek dictionary or a Greek lexicon to understand why they translated that word that way. Could it have been translated other ways? And yes, it could be. And sometimes the other translations kind of make a little more sense and give a little bit more light and depth into the meaning of these passages that were written to us. Well, actually, they weren't written to us. Who were they written to?
The Hebrews.
The Hebrews. The Hebrews that believe in Jesus. But there's things that we can take from this, and we can take a truth that is present here, and we can apply it, and we can say this is something that we can hold on to as a part and a point of our faith. So, if somebody could read verse 1 for us, nice and loud.
Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us.
Well, there you go. So, I'm going to just throw this out there. Anytime you see the word therefore, we have to understand that it's there, and we have to look for. What does it mean to look for? What's the word F-O-R-E mean?
Like foretell, maybe, or like,
Foretell means what?
like
To tell something ahead,
yeah.
right? So when you see the word therefore, you got to back up to what came before it. Because it's saying that because of what was said before, now we understand this. So I want you to go back 1 verse. To the end of Hebrews chapter 11. Now, what is in churchianity? What do we call churchianity? What do we call Hebrews chapter 11? What's it called?
All faith.
The faith chapter, right? Because how does it open? And we know that
By faith,
faith is the
evidence of things hoped for,
blah, 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 something we don't see, that we hope for, that we understand, that, yeah, all these words, word salad. But then it gives us some examples of faith, right? Like we have Abraham, and honestly, Shelley and I we were having a conversation last night about Abraham. Remember what it was, Shelley? About his faith.
Oh, yes, like how, because he was living in
Abraham, so we want to automatically assume that Abram was this amazing man of God.
Yeah.
And one day God called him and said, go move to this other country and live this place where you don't know anybody and I'll be with you. And then before that, he had this amazing relationship with God. But you know what the truth of the matter is? He was a pagan man, living in a pagan country, worshiping pagan gods, with pagan people, with pagan temples, with all of this pagan stuff around him. And one time, he opened himself up to listening to the one true God. And at that moment, God said, he heard from God to say, go live in this other country. Go where I'm leading you. And this is going to be your inheritance. And it was because of that one act, not because he had done sacrifices to God all of his life and he had always had this inheritance or heritage of faith. It was because of the one time that God told him, go to another country where I'm leading you and this will be your inheritance. That was what was counted as faith because he submitted and he listened. That's it. Not because he gave the right sacrifices, not because he said the right words, not because he lived a holy life. It was only because he submitted. And if you don't believe me, it does have that up here about the faith of Abraham. By faith, Abraham, where's that? Obeyed. That's it. He obeyed when he was called. That was the first act of faith.
I got a question.
Yeah.
I thought God said because Abraham would raise his children in a way, he commanded them that.
He would. Because, yes, that was part of the inheritance, was that he would have a family that would follow God, right? Through Isaac and his
Even through
descendants.
Even through Ishmael, he raised them up too, right? Because they lived in his household.
They did, yes. They did. I know it's confusing, but the very first thing that he did that proved his faith was just that single act of obedience. There was nothing before that. There was no sacrifices before that made him faithful, that brought faith into his life. It was only that act of obedience to move to a country that he didn't know about, to get that inheritance. His belief in obedience was faith, and that's it. So when everybody's like, oh, faith is sacrificing, nope. It's one thing. Obedience and submission. That's it. Okay, anyway. Nobody's arguing, right?
Amen.
So we're back to the word therefore. So we're looking at chapter 11. I'm going to read 39 and 40. And all these, speaking of all of the founders of the faith, obtained a good testimony through faith, but they did not receive the promise. And what was the promise? Of deliverance. Of a Messiah. They never saw that, even though they had faith. Right? They saw points of deliverance and points of salvation within their life, but they never saw the Messiah that would bring the end of striving to be saved. Because before, what was the sacrifices all about? It was all about no matter what we did, it wasn't good enough, so we had to have another sacrifice. And then guess what? We had to have another sacrifice. And then guess what? There had to be another sacrifice, because that sacrifice was not enough to fully restore our relationship with God.
So, wait a minute, that sacrifice that they did every year was for the whole year, or?
Well, no, so you had the yearly sacrifice, then you had all the individual sacrifices for every sin that you committed.
Yes.
Whether it was you had to sacrifice a lamb, or you had to sacrifice 2 doves, or whether you had to sacrifice a goat, or whether you had to take an oxen. It was just, oh yeah, we'd be totally broke.
So the priest could eat.
Well, that's part of it. Yeah, they did get to consume some of the meat from the sacrifice, but I mean, Judaism was a bloody religion. There was a constant flow of blood from the temple because of all of the animals that were sacrificed, because never was there the promise of the total annihilation of the chasm between man and God. It was just a bridge, and then as soon as they sinned again, it was broken, and the bridge had to be built again, and then they would sin, and the bridge was broken, and it had to be built again. But it wasn't until Christ that it was completely annihilated. The broken relationship between man and God was restored because of the new covenant that was created. And it said God provided something better for us. That's what verse 40 here. That they would not be made perfect apart from us. Basically, everything that the religion required before never brought them into a perfect relationship with God until Christ. Everything they did never brought them and attained them perfect salvation until Christ. And that's what it said. Their relationship was never made perfect apart from us, meaning that until these people, these Jews who accepted Christ came, the Jewish religion never attained perfection in their relationship with God. And so now we get to the therefore in chapter 12. Because of the work of faith that all of the forebearers had done, and all the sacrifices they had made, to bring them to the point of Christ. And now we have Christ. And so because we have Christ, we must now, therefore, since we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, lay aside every weight. Which weight? Every weight. What do we see as weight? Jesus said, take on my burden because my yoke is light. right? Get rid of your burdens. What burdens do we carry as humans?
Stress.
Stress from what?
Work and family.
Work, family, children, spouses, the future, right? The past. All of these things weigh us down. But what are we told to do? Because we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. Now, this word witnesses, if you look in the Greek, this is where it gets fun, right? This is where we're going to go back. It says, we are encompassed by such a great cloud of witnesses. And we're going to look at the Greek for cloud because we're like, oh, we're in the spiritual realm. No, it's not that. It literally means a dense crowd, a multitude, a great company of witnesses. We are in such a great company of witnesses. What are witnesses? What's that?
Somebody who has first icon witness, like testimony.
Somebody who has a testimony about it?
Yeah.
When we look at the Greek for the word that was translated to witnesses is, I'm going to completely destroy this, martus. And it's where we get our word martyr. Now, how do we understand martyrs?
They're dead.
Amen. For those of you who didn't hear, she said, they're dead. Okay. That's part of it, but when we look at martyrs, church history, who do we say is the first martyr? Stephen. Why? Why do we say he's a martyr?
Because he saw up in heaven and he tried to explain to them and they rejected it.
Right?
But
the word that was used,
So they killed him.
he's a witness. We are surrounded by a cloud of martyrs or witnesses.
Yeah, that's true.
Dead
Yeah.
bodies.
Yeah, he was surrounded in stone.
Yeah,
So
well,
that takes us to Revelations 12. And
Right.
They overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their
and
testimony.
the word of their testimony.
Love not their lives to the death.
There you go. But we even see that this cloud of witnesses, it harkens back, therefore, this cloud of witnesses. Who were the cloud of witnesses?
The Hall of Famers.
The Hall of Faithers, right? Now, let's be real honest here. When this is written to the Jewish believers, their basis and their foundation of faith was in the Hall of Faithers, right? All those people who had gone before and had never seen the promise of Christ, but had died in faith that one day he would come. We kind of have it as Gentile believers, we kind of have a different cloud of witnesses. When we look over the history of the church, we have this foundation of faith that's been built up by the sacrifices of others. Now, sometimes they died, sometimes they were killed.
Does that include Anna and Simeon?
I don't know, does it?
They weren't martyred. But they did wait for
They
the
did
promise.
wait, right? We can't really say who our cloud of witnesses is. But we can look at history and say there's been multiple people who have died in faith, but they had the promise. And they had Christ. Right? So we want to super spiritualize this and say, oh, we're surrounded by this cloud of our forebearers. But that's not really what the scripture is talking about. When we're talking about the witnesses of the perfection of Christ that's coming, right? They were looking at, we can't walk away from our faith because all of these people died with the faith that perfection was going to come, and we're here and we have perfection. We have Christ. We have the perfect. Why would we fall back into what just people had as a shadow of that? We must pursue and continue on in what we know because we have the perfect Christ, the perfect sacrifice, the perfect connection that has brought us back to a relationship with God. And so as Gentile believers, we look at this and say, okay, well, we want to personalize it and say, well, all these people, no. We don't even have to worry about this. We just need to go to the second part of laying aside every weight. Our weights are even more simple than what the weights were of the Jewish believers.
Yeah.
Because we might just have a misunderstanding with our family, or we might just have a not seeing eye to eye about how we should live. They had people pursuing them to kill them and stone them for leaving the Jewish faith. That's the weight that they were carrying. That's the weight that they were struggling with, is complete abandonment from your family. Your family was looking to stone you because you were walking away from the faith in their mind, when actually they were walking into the more perfect faith, a better covenant that superseded that old covenant of sacrifice. And the only sacrifice we have to lay aside, and we have to do, is to laying aside the things that would so easily beset us.
Yes.
Right? It's not even the sins, because that work's already done. The stress of not being good enough, or not having enough, or not being a good enough father, not being a good enough son, not being a good enough friend, we have to learn to cast that aside. And then on top of that, the sin which so easily, some of these translations say so easily ensnares us. But Alex, I want you to read that again from what your translation says.
And sin, which clings so closely.
That's a completely different ideology. Sin which clings so closely. But closely is not on, is it? No? But if we look at the other translations, sin which so easily ensnares us. What does that sound like?
You can't get out.
You can't get out of it.
That's right.
Right? Isn't that a completely different thought? That it's close but cannot touch. As opposed to being ensnared by.
Taken by.
So,
So you're captured by it.
So easily beset.
Like make you maybe stumble or something.
Right, but it's just close by.
Yeah.
Right? What did was it Psalm 91, right? The pestilence is all around me, but it's not on me. Right? It's a similar thought. That it's not about, everybody wants to say, oh, well, it's just so easy to fall into sin. Well, kind of like you're looking for it. You're making an excuse. Well, I just kind of happened into it. It just stumbled. Well, the truth of the matter is that it's just close by. But sometimes we make that choice to go ahead and fall into the trap.
Or it's on your computer.
Yeah, right? Oh, I just accidentally clicked on that website. I accidentally typed in the www. Blah, 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 and clicked on go. No, that's not how it works. No, it was nearby, but you could have chosen another path. There's a difference between it being nearby and it easily entangling. And it actually, if we go back to the Greek, once again, I'm going to butcher the word here. It's been translated as easily entangling, which feels like it's more of a picture of being trapped. But the Greek word is ioperistatos. I'm butchering that, I know. But it actually says easily surrounding. Not entangling. It's around us, but it's not touching us. Right? So we're going to lay aside the things that are burdening us and walking right by the things that could trap us if we allow it to. But we're not going to. It's close, but it's not touching. It's nearby, but it's not holding us back. There's a big difference there. And it says we're going to be able to run with endurance the race that is set before us. It's set there. And that is actually a reasonable translation of that word. It's lying before. It's placed before us. It's like we're at a table. And the race and the ability to win the race has been placed right in front of us. Everybody wants to say, oh, it's a race, it's a struggle. I'm struggling for Jesus. Right? You ever heard that one before? Oh, every day is struggle. I'm just lucky to get out of bed. That doesn't sound like it's a meal that's been placed before you, where all you got to do is just engage with it. All you have to do is take that step. One step at a time. That's all he's asking us. One step. One step. It's not a race as in we're competing to see who's the best. Right? It's more of a race just to see if you can keep pushing forward, if you can take that step, that next step. You cast off the weights that are trying to hold you down. You walk past the sin that's nearby, not grabbing you, and you just take that step, that one step, one step, one step. Now, this is how we're able to do this. Okay? What empowers us to be able to do this is all in verse 2. Somebody could read verse 2 for me, please.
I'll read it. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding the shame. Now he is seated in the place of honor beside God's throne.
Okay. So, we lay aside the weight. We're just skating by all the sins. And we're pushing forward to the things that's set right ahead of us. Because we are looking to Jesus, right? Just like Peter in the waves, right? The moment he took his eyes off Christ, that's when he became ensnared.
Look, look, look.
Right? Right? He began to drown. And this is this is the part that I really want you to hold on to. Is this next little snippet. The author and finisher of our faith. Now, the author, the beginner, the starter of our faith. For the Jews, this was a big deal. Because for them, faith began with Abraham. But it was it was reborn with Christ. He was the beginner of that new faith. Why? Because he was the initiator of the new covenant. And this is the other word I want you to look at. Is it says the finisher of our faith. Now, some people want to look at this and say that's a future thing. My faith is being finished day by day. Right? You ever heard that before? No? Never?
No, I never heard it day by day.
Day by day. He's finishing something. Like it's a constant work. Like he's a painter and every day he's putting a little bit more paint on there and finishing up the painting a little bit at a time.
Because he's going to be the one who brings it to completion, the work that he started in you.
Yes, but what we have to understand is that it is already complete.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, but then he was the Word too. He was the Word in the beginning.
Yes.
The Word was already there.
Yes, he was the Word. Correct. Yes. That's an important thing to remember. He was from the beginning, and he is at the beginning of this faith that we have. He's the founder of it. He is the chief cornerstone upon which everything else is built. But the important thing is to understand that he's also the finisher. Not because he's going to finish, but because it is finished. He said that. It is finished. It is complete. The Greek word there, I'm going to get that to you for here in a second here. Well, where am I at? I got to click on the right spot. Okay, once again, BibleHub.com, interlinear Bible. You can do all this yourself. You don't need me to tell you and guide you through this. Use it, understand it. The perfecter, completer, and finisher. When we look at a race at the Olympics, we have a baton race, right? The very last person to take the baton, they are the finisher. They're the anchor leg. They bring that race to a completion. It's over. And it's the same idea here. Christ has completed this for us. So we're able to cast off the things, the weights of this world, the weights of this life. We're able to walk past the sins. They're close but not grabbing. We're able to continue to run the race because the work is done for us. It's complete. Now, that's not to say we aren't supposed to renew our minds daily. We still have a hand in this. But the work is done. We have to rest sometimes in knowing that the work is done. Get off the struggle bus and understand it's done. It's completed. Right? We like to stay on the struggle bus though, don't we?
Yeah.
Right? Don't we? Oh, I'm just suffering for Christ. No, you're not. It's over, man. The suffering is completed. Walk in the victory. It's done. It's finished. It's complete. All right. I know it sounds, and I'm not trying to oversimplify. There's still going to be some struggles. We're still going to have some attacks of the enemy that we have to push back against and say, nope, the work's done. But we have to walk in that, saying it's done. All right? And we see that Christ, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross. Now, not enduring it the way that we endure something that we don't enjoy. He endured it with joy, knowing that when that work was done, things would be complete. It would be over. That relationship would be restored with God once again. And then the other word I really want to focus on here is this despising the shame. He endured the cross. When we use the word despise, what do we think of the word despise? Hate.
Extreme.
Extreme hate.
Total.
Total hate, right?
Or compass.
But there's a better word that I like, and Shelley, what did your rather than despise, what did your translation use?
Wait, what verse are we again? Must have missed.
Verse 2.
Verse 2. Okay.
Yes.
Mine says disregarding.
Disregard. There's a difference between despising something and disregarding something.
Yeah. There's a big difference.
There's a big difference, isn't there?
Yeah.
Right? You can disregard the actions of your neighbor without despising your neighbor and hating them completely. We can do things in our life disregarding. Now, disregard can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing, right? We can know that there's consequences of our actions, but disregard those consequences and still do something, knowing that what we're doing is wrong and that there's going to be punishment for those actions.
Sure.
I was just having a conversation with my children on the way here about the difference between knowingly breaking the law and speeding and not knowing, but the law doesn't care. You're still breaking the law and there's still going to be consequences for that, right? And you can be woefully disregarding something, or you can know that there's a consequence for something and disregard it and say, that's not going to sway me. Right? And I think we have to understand that Christ didn't go to the cross hating what the cross represented. Because that's hating the shame. He didn't hate the shame. And the shame wasn't in dying on the cross. The shame was in what the cross represented to humanity at that time. Because the cross was reserved for the worst of offenders. And even Pilate himself said, I see no wrong in this man. And according to the Roman rules, he did nothing wrong. But he was still crucified on the cross. And it was reserved for the worst of the worst. The thieves, the murderers, those who did terrible things to others within society. And it wasn't a Jewish punishment. It wasn't a spiritual punishment. It was physical in nature. But he said, it doesn't matter. This is what has to be done, and I'm going to do it. Not because he hated the fact that he would be shamed, but it had no consequence on his decision. Despite the fact that there was shame involved, oh well, it had to be done, so he did it. And it was because of his work on the cross that our faith was started and completed, all within his work. And now, once again, because of that, he is sitting at the right hand of the throne of God. That's where our King resides. That's where our high priest resides. That's where our good shepherd resides. That's where our intercessor resides. All of these things that we're looking for man to fill. We want a man to be our king. We want a man to be our shepherd. We want a man to be our intercessor. All of these things that we're looking for man to be, Christ is. And he is residing at the right hand of God, being these things, abiding in these things. And our job is to lay aside the weight, ignore the sins that are close to us, pushing through, and then abide in him, knowing that he has completed the work, and we are able to truly sit in heavenly places in Christ because of his work. And it's really easy to get drugged down by I'm just striving for Jesus, but no, we are sitting with him. He made us his brothers and sisters, his heirs. We are heirs with Christ in this promise. And go ahead and finish it.
And Jesus has 2 addresses. One at the right hand of the Father and one in my heart.
He has, we are his temple. We are his temple. We are the place in which he resides. And this is why we don't call any building the church. We are the body. We are where he resides. We are the temple. We are that place of sacrifice. We are it. We are his brothers and sisters. We are the children of the Most High God. It is finished. It is complete. And we have to abide and reside in that knowledge. So that's my encouragement for you today, is continue to understand who you are. The access that you have to the throne of God because of our high priest Jesus. And don't disregard that and think of it as something small. Don't look for it in a man. Look for it in Jesus and only in Jesus. Keep your eyes on him, because he will bring you to those heavenly places in him. All right?
Now that's some good news.
Yeah.
Some good news. That's the gospel.